Welcome to It's No Secret, a podcast for those who want their money questions answered.
Join us as we talk to real Kiwis and share truths about our own financial lives, because the truth is, there is no secret to achieving financial freedom. Lovely listeners, welcome back to another episode of It's No Secret. Today we're chatting about how much money you actually need to retire. This is a little bit of a recap of an episode we have done a couple of years ago, and it'll be interesting to see if we still need the same amount of money to retire, Christine, or if we've changed our numbers. But why are we talking about this when retirement can often feel so far away, 20, 30, 40 years potentially for some of us? Do we actually need to be thinking about retirement now? Is it something that sneaks up on us, or is it something that we can just wish away in the future and not do things or take action on right now? And if we do want to think about it or take action, where do we start in working out how much money we might need to fund our retirement, which is also like a weird concept anyway, right? It's really hard to figure out what that concept even is. So before we get into that, and whilst we're on some nice doom and gloom stats,
Seems to be a theme of our podcast
of late, exactly. In 2022, Tiara Ahanga, the Retirement Commission of New Zealand, found that 65% of New Zealanders aged over 55 had no plan or only a vague plan of how they would fund their retirement. That is terrifying for me, terrifying. Let's assume that you were asked that question at age 55 and you were planning to retire at 65. You have 10 years to not only figure out what that plan will be, but then actually make that plan happen. And so there's a few things there that are really scary. The fact that a lot of people just are going into retirement without even having an idea. But the second part is like, if you do have an idea, you have to have that idea early on. So you've got some time to let the plan play out.
Definitely. I mean,
can't let it play out for 3 years pre-retirement.
Is it a question that you ask yourself like now on a weekly, monthly basis?
Like how I'm going to fund my retirement?
Or just like, I guess at a high level, how much do I need and how am I going to get there?
That's a good point.
Because that's kind of like a goal, right?
I don't stress so much about how I'm going to get there because I think you and I are like similar in that we're just deep growth mindset. Like money will come, it'll be fine kind of.
We'll hustle.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think about like how am I going to retire or what am I going to have to fund my retirement? Because that kind of leads into some of the actual real life conversations and decision points that we're having to make now in our like 30s and 40s, which is like, how big do we go on upsizing our house? And do we buy an investment property, or are we doubling down on like making sure we're regular investing into our investment account? And I think those are surreptitiously decisions that we're making that are influenced by the fact that we have spent some time thinking about funding of retirement and knowing that we're going to have to do that outside of just New Zealand super and any government benefits.
So do you have like a number in mind? Or, you know, in terms of your like...
When you say number in mind, do you mean like income that we want to pay ourselves in retirement or like a lump sum?
Both. Like in terms of how, like reverse engineering it a little bit. Have you done that?
We have.
Yeah.
I feel like I revert more to lump sum because it's kind of the typical like you think in it's easier to think in an accumulation mindset, right? Like how much do I need to work towards accumulating and having a lump sum? And then what do I do with that lump sum, or how long will that lump sum last? But then equally you could look at it from the point of view of like how much money do I need every year in retirement potentially, and then figure out how you're going to source that income, because that could come from many different like factors. I feel like the last time we talked about this, I should probably bring up those very old show notes, but the last time we talked about this, I feel like it was somewhere in the realm of like $1.8 to $2 million in liquid assets being outside of property.
And then I feel like we also talked about the kind of average income being around like 70K, 100K individually each, which is obviously the above the median income in New Zealand. So we're kind of banking on that being our after-tax amount that we can then live on. So we're definitely aiming for more of a comfortable retirement.
Exactly. And I had always used the like 4% rule or the 20 rule, which is basically like take the income that you would like to be living on or be able to spend in today's dollars, times it by 20, and that's the capitalized sum that you need to save that you can then draw down an income from ongoing. So let's say like in today's dollars, if Luke and I want to retire and we are not paying off a mortgage, we're just thinking about pure expenses, we probably want to spend somewhere in the realm of like $100,000 a year. I'd say conservatively, if you think about, your kind of food costs and power bills and that kind of maybe being about a third of those expenses.
Yeah.
And then potentially I'm thinking, okay, if we want to travel, which I know we will, thinking about the cost of like some domestic holidays and maybe an international holiday, that's easily $30,000 total for two people, I'd say. Yeah. And maybe we want to go business class. Who knows? Like
upgrade.
Depends how bougie our retirement plans to be. Yeah. And then like maybe a little bit of flexibility around the other stuff. So $100,000, this is where the fun maths comes in, times 20. Everyone can do that maths is $2 million. Yeah, right. So that's typically where you would get those numbers that I think get bandied around a lot in terms of like, if you want a lifestyle where you can spend $50,000 a year, you need to have $1 million in usable assets. If you want $100,000 a year, you need to have $2 million in usable assets.
Do you know where that 20 times came from? What's the logic behind that? Do you know?
It's to do with the amount that you can then draw down on the like income earned, right, if that makes sense. So it's to do with the ratio. I'm probably going to really poorly describe this, and some very smart listener will be like, no, Kat. Probably one of the financial advisors that listen to this will be like, no, Kat. But it's kind of to do with the fact that that was based off the assumption that you could then draw down 4% income and essentially not eat into the capital and get the amount back that you would want from expenses.
But then, so does that mean that at the end of retirement, you'd be left with the base still?
You'd still have some lump sum of capital, yes. Right. Now, that's why what do you need in retirement becomes quite a hot topic, because there's been a lot of literature that's worked on that basis, which is then assuming that when you pass away, there's a significant sum of capital remaining to pass on to future generations. Now, that's not everybody's aspiration, and that's not also possible for everybody. So that's where you start to get into like some of the nuances of, okay, if you want to spend $100,000 a year, do you actually truly need $2 million of capitalized funds to live off? Or can you have $1 million of funds and then, have flexibility and other things? But I mean, I look at that and I'm like, $1 million divided by $100,000, that's not very many years. Like, a little bit high risk.
Yeah, especially if you have health issues, which you probably might have when you're in your 80s.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice. I think that's a good starting point as to where you're sitting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't really know if we would need $2 million. I feel like we probably would.
Yeah. I mean, but also you guys like traveling, and it's not like we're...
I can just hear Stephen's voice in my head being like, Kat, people can retire with $500,000. And I'm like, I know they can, but that also terrifies me because I don't quite understand how they can.
And
like if I think of a single person and I'm like, how can you retire with $500,000? And maybe this is where, Christine, some of your amazing resources can come into play, because let's say I'm a single individual and I'm retiring. How much am I getting from New Zealand Super? Can you remind me?
$500 a week after tax.
$500 a week after tax. Okay, so then let's say you have $500,000 a year. $500,000 in like a capitalized lump sum.
Yeah.
And that's growing by, I don't know, are we going to say you're a high risk person, like 8%?
Yeah, sure.
A year?
Yeah.
Yeah. So $500,000 times 8%, $40,000
per year. Yeah,
so right. Let's say you're drawing out all of your earnings on that investment every year.
For how long? 10.
Well, for as long as you want, right? So you're just not letting the capitalized sum grow.
Yeah,
you're basically taking out all investment earnings, whether it be in dividend form or capital growth, but you're taking out your full 8% return every year. So you've got then $40,000 pre-tax, may I add, because you'll pay some tax on that.
Yeah.
Plus your $500 a week. Yeah. And what's that? $500 a week times 52. Is that net? You said after tax.
It's after tax, yeah.
Yeah, so $26,000. Okay, plus 40 off some tax. So maybe like $63,000 a year?
Yeah, and for context, the median income for a single person earning a salary is an annual salary of $70,000.
Okay, yeah.
So that's a little bit under the median, basically.
That is. I think you would say the big caveat to that. So I mean, look, I can see Stephen's argument of like, Kat, people can retire on $500,000.
Yeah.
challenge with that potentially people don't think about is that's $500K outside of your house.
Yeah.
Because if you are then earning, say, between super and drawing down from that pot of money, $60,000 a year, you can't really afford to have $30,000 of that going to a mortgage repayment or rent.
Yeah.
That then significantly starts to eat into your ability to live a comfortable life.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's not even get started on the cost of home ownership either. In terms of, paying for rates. What if you've held this house for 20 years, you're going to have to do some repairs. Maybe you want to renovate,
$5,000 a year.
Yeah.
Yep.
You want to do the gardens, whatever, because you have more time to be at the house now. So having a bit more of a buffer is probably a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Is this just blowing my argument out of the water though, that I need $1.8 million?
No, I mean, I think the point about the house is really important because I think having the investments outside of that is probably where a lot of Kiwis go wrong in terms of the reliance on their home, right?
Yep.
As that being the thing that's going to get them through retirement. And for sure you can downsize, but there's a lot that comes with that, right?
Oh, a fantastic story on a recent downsize.
Okay.
So if you've listened to the show before, you have heard us just rant about the fact that we don't believe that downsizing and actually getting money out of downsizing is something that often happens because what people don't appreciate when they're thinking about downsizing is you probably want to stay living in the area that you have lived in for quite a period of time.
Yep.
You're not necessarily downsizing from the suburb that you've lived in for 20 years and then moving to a completely different suburb that you've never lived in, right? Mm-hmm. And so dependent on where you are, when you're staying within the suburb, to go from a 4-bedroom house that might have been your family home to a 2-bedroom apartment or unit that is livable for someone older in life, that is secure, that is potentially new and has less maintenance, doesn't necessarily guarantee a very big difference in price point. Yeah. And so I actually just saw this recently with a work colleague here. He had a family member who downsized in Hobsonville, sold the 4-bedroom house, bought a brand new, beautiful water view apartment that she loves, also in Hobsonville. And he's like, it was basically an upsizing cost or close to. Your net same cost, but different thing.
Yeah.
So
are you getting any capital out of that?
No. And then you've done your downsize from a lifestyle point of view and you're in somewhere that potentially suits you for a much longer period of time as you're in your retirement, but you've not gotten $500,000 out of that to potentially fund your retirement. And so relying on that as your sole strategy for retirement is a horrific idea in my humble opinion.
I second that as well. So
I've also seen this play out recently where another family member did, I guess, the initial downsize before probably a future downsize. And this was from essentially a 3-bedroom, 1 bathroom, but big outdoor space home into a 2-bedroom unit. Yeah. And they did move suburb because they wanted to move to a slightly nicer, I guess, more secure and safer suburb. And so in order to do that, the price differential between those two properties was only $100,000.
Yeah, right.
So they've downsized and freed up $100,000 of capital. But is that enough for you to retire off?
Probably not.
If you're going to spend, in addition to your NZ Super, another $40,000 a year, that's not, or even $30,000 a year, that's not going to last you very long.
What would you say to someone that might go from home ownership to renting?
I'd say that could be a fantastic option for you.
Yeah. Or risky in a lot of ways as well.
It could be risky.
You might need modifications as you age to the house. You could get kicked out essentially.
I feel like the lifestyle risk is high, but the financial risk is lower.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and I guess a lot of people would probably discount renting in older age because it would naturally make them a little bit more nervous and you probably, need a little bit more sense of security in terms of where you're living. But equally, you've got to think of what am I giving up if I then own a house? Because
Yeah.
And potentially like still paying off a mortgage or not able to, be entirely debt free. And then you're at the risk of interest rates.
Yeah.
You, as you've pointed out, have maintenance and other costs and things that don't come into play when you're a renter.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So yes.
Nice.
Okay.
So I guess we've got, maybe 500, maybe at 1.8. Like, how much do we actually need? And how do we go about working it?
How are we finding this out?
Well,
I mean, you've got to think about what you want in the future, right?
Yep.
We love a little bit of like, think about what's ahead. Think about like, what am I doing when I'm retiring?
Yep.
When do I want to retire is the other big factor, because the underlying assumption that we've not really talked about here is if we're mentioning NZ Super, you can only get that at 65.
Yeah.
And I would say for a lot of ambitious young millennials and Gen Zers, hello, all of us,
Hi.
you probably want to retire before you're 65.
Yeah.
And so
Dreams
you can't add that guaranteed income into that calculation. If you want to retire at 60, you've got to figure out how to fund that income gap then.
We're also living longer as well. We know that women in particular are living well into their 90s.
Yep.
So,
if you're under age 30 in New Zealand right now, you are projected to live well into your 90s.
Yep.
So, we have quite a long period of time to fund when it comes to retirement as well, potentially. But yeah, it's really thinking about like, okay, well, what type of retirement lifestyle do I want?
Yeah.
What lifestyle are you having?
Well,
tell us.
I'm aiming for a comfortable one. I would like to be doing some traveling.
Okay.
That would be nice.
Good.
Yeah. What else do I want?
I feel like looking at some of these numbers, because if anyone Googles, like what do I need to live in retirement, there are some kind of stats and general indications provided by various bodies in New Zealand, right? Like Te Aroha is definitely one. Massey University do a retirement study, I think, every year around this.
Yep.
There are some numbers to help you, and they kind of categorize it into like basic and comfortable retirements. I would say that the definition of their comfortable retirement is probably different from your definition of a comfortable retirement.
Yep,
and that's also fine, but it's one of those things where it's like you probably need to figure out, okay, well, if I'm saying I want a comfortable retirement, is that an overseas holiday every year? Is that the flexibility to do lots of activities that you enjoy that cost money? Is that being able to make choices as and when you want, as opposed to necessarily needing to budget? Like, what is it? Or are you someone that's pretty chill in retirement and kind of more the basic retirement end, which is just spend time at home and enjoy your property and not necessarily do a lot of travel, and maybe you are a homebody?
Or maybe you're someone that doesn't ever want to stop working, but you just want to reduce the amount of work that you do. So you could go down to a 4-day work week.
Exactly.
And so then that's a completely different modeling or like scenario than cutting off your work at 65.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. Okay. So you want a comfortable retirement.
Yes.
And then once you decided that, what did you do?
Well, so I think I honestly Googled like, how much do I need to retire?
Okay.
And the Massey University study popped up. And I think that that's probably a good starting point for like general New Zealand.
Yep.
In the sense that they do talk about basic, aka no frill, sort of household or retirement, and then they've got the comfy one. And so they project the lump sum savings needed to support a 2-person, no frills household. So that's like a basic retirement. In an urban setting now sits at $235,000, which feels kind of low to me.
It does.
And $120,000 for a similar household in a rural area. So that's like in the city.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah. And I'm going to say the assumption, I probably need to check the actual research, that is outside of home ownership, because otherwise that would be unlivable in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then contrasting that out to a metropolitan 2-person choices household would require $831,000, which is a lot more. That's 600,000-ish more. While their provincial counterparts would need 539. So it's essentially that's actually 400,000 more.
800,000. Was that for a couple?
Yeah, in the city.
Okay.
Versus regional would be 500,000.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think that these are helpful numbers in that people should take them as like a minimum.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like I would take that as, okay, if I'm not at all prepared for retirement and I'm that person that was asked that question of, are you 55 and have you thought about retirement? And my answer is no. I would be looking at that and being like, I need to, at the bare minimum over the next 10 years, be trying to get to that basic retirement number.
Yeah.
Right? And whatever my what was it for a couple, like 255,000.
Yeah.
If my KiwiSaver right now has 60 grand in it, I need to do everything I can to get it to 255K in combination with my partner.
Yeah.
Right. And then be very realistic about the fact that I'm not going to have many choices in my retirement versus if I am maybe having a bit more time.
Yeah.
Because equally, like if you're having that conversation at 55 and you've got 60 grand in your KiwiSaver and you're like, I want a comfortable retirement with some choices and I need 855,000 and you only have 10 years to do that, that is going to be exceptionally challenging.
And stressful.
So, the sooner you can think about that, the better, particularly if you err to the side of like wanting to have more choices.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
So we've talked about basic retirement versus comfortable retirement and whether or not whether or not those numbers even really apply to us. So then I guess one way you could maybe think about, do those numbers apply to you, is, well, what are you currently earning and like what does it cost for you to live off? Because if you're trying to figure out how much you need to live on in retirement, well, that's surely a reasonable starting point.
Yes, it is. It is. And in the same like study that Massey did, they divide this out between a basic and a comfortable retirement and they wrap some figures around that. So they say that a basic retirement budget for a single person living in a metro area, that's Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, is expected to require roughly $42,900, so $50,000 a year. That's after tax.
Yeah.
When you look at what NZ Super is, it's roughly $26,000 after tax. That will leave you a gap for a basic retirement of $17,000 per year, which is roughly $329 per week.
Yeah.
After tax.
Yeah.
So that's on a basic level.
Okay, so that's basic.
Yeah.
So then going back to that like rule of 20 thing that I did at the start, one way that you could then think about it is, okay, if I'm going to rely on NZ Super and I'm happy to work until I'm 65 and I need to then make up the gap to the basic retirement, you take your 17,000 per year and you times that by 20 and that's the amount potentially that you need to have in KiwiSaver or investments.
Yeah, exactly. So
what is that? Let's have a look.
Because the research says that you would...
That's $340,000.
Oh, that's like perfectly aligned to the research. They say...
The math going to math today.
Yeah, so maybe that's the logic that they use. They say that you would need $355,000 in today's dollars to cover that gap. Yeah. Which is good. So then let's apply the same logic to comfort level, comfortable retirement. So they say an individual living in a metro area is assumed to require $60,000 per year.
Yep.
So roughly $10,000 more.
Outside of home costs.
Yeah, I think assume
it's
because,
like you're not as in when I say home costs, no rent and no mortgage. Like they're assuming that you have somewhere to live, but okay.
Let's say that assumption. We can verify it as well, or just link to the show notes in the show notes, the research.
The deets.
Yep. So you basically need an extra $10,000 a year after tax if you want to have a comfortable retirement budget. So then you look at what an NZ Super is. Again, it's $26,000 after tax. So you'll have a shortfall of $34,600.
Yep.
Which is roughly $660 per week. So that's almost double a basic retirement budget.
Yeah.
So they suggest that you would need to save an additional $717,000.
Yeah. And my little handy calculator says $694. So I'm going to go for the upper limit. Go 1717.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, perfect. Okay.
It's pretty good.
That is pretty good. Yeah. But then I guess, okay, so we say that's pretty good, but then it's like, okay, how do you know as a couple you're going to be able to live on $60,000 a year?
Yeah.
Do you currently live on $60,000 a year?
No, we do.
If you removed your rent, do you?
I think we live off a bit more than slightly more, but I guess the caveat to that is we're not, we're living above the baseline that you would need. So if but
you're beyond their version of comfortable, which I think is also probably a fair thing to discern in that like comfortable is not going to be everybody's comfortable as we talked about, and so how much extra do you need? Yeah,
good question. Well, so before this podcast, we basically jumped over to the paye.net.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah,
love that
website.
Calculator. Spend way too much time there.
Yeah, and I put in Ollie and I's income, total income, and then it takes out KiwiSaver at a percentage rate of 4%, and then ACC, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And I then took out what we save on a fortnightly basis.
Because you're not saving in retirement. Like, what's the point of spending?
That's true,
please.
Yeah. And then if
you're saving something is deeply wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, you need to be spending. And then, so just to give you a ballpark as to where we sit right now in terms of disposable or like what it costs for us to live.
Yep.
We spend roughly or live on roughly $3,200 per fortnight.
Yep.
After tax.
Okay.
So that's
which is $83,000 a year.
Yeah.
And they're saying that a comfortable retirement is $60,000 a year. Does the $83,000 include your rent?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's work on a baseline assumption that you owned your own home.
Yeah.
Then potentially $60,000 a year in today's costs and you're not paying rent is actually not vastly different from what you're kind of spending and doing now.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a decent starting point.
We would want to be traveling more. Yeah. So
well, this is the unknown, right? It's like it's hard to know what your lifestyle is going to be like. Are you someone that's going to be in really great health and have the ability and have family elsewhere? You know, maybe you have kids that move overseas and you want to spend time in Australia and New Zealand or whatever that might look like. It's very hard to imagine when you're 20, 30, 40.
Yeah.
But I guess there is a starting point here, which is like maybe these numbers from Massey are kind of the base level minimums that we should be achieving too. Yeah. And then everything above that is just going to give you more and more flexibility and choice.
Yeah, for sure.
I would also just say, knowing what I know about you and Ollie, I would be deeply disappointed if you got to retirement and only had $700,000
yeah, me too.
for it. I feel like in terms of how much you guys prioritize financial freedom and the choices that you make, I think you're able to well and truly exceed that, which is a great segue into figuring out, well, how will we know, Christine? What are the calculators and resources to figure out if our KiwiSaver is on track or our investment account is on track to $717,000?
Yeah, great question. So
do I just chuck it in a compounding calc? What do I do?
We go to Google and we search how do I retire comfortably calculator. Yeah. The one that came up immediately for me was Sorted's retirement calculator, and it kind of takes you along a similar vein or like asks you a few questions in line with the Massey University study. So it asks what your age is now, what the retirement age that you want to get to is. Are you doing it solo or with your partner? Are you planning to live in the regions versus main centres?
Right.
And then are you going to have a choices versus no frill kind of lifestyle? And when you select that, it then auto-populates the weekly allowance to give yourself in order to have each of those ones.
Right. Which is a good starting point if you don't know how to set the goal of like, what do you want to live off?
Yeah, exactly. And if you do have a goal already in mind, it does have an option to put your own goal in terms of weekly income in. And so, yeah, it's a bit flexible, which is good.
I would be fascinated to know how many people are actually clicking no frills.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that is just a loaded question of like, it's like saying to people like, do you want to live in joy or like just semi-joy? No one's picking semi-joy. So
that's so true, actually.
I'm like, it's kind of funny in the way that it's phrased like that, because surely most people click choices.
Yeah.
And then maybe are totally frightened by what the outcome of that number is. And then perhaps they revert back to no frills. Anyway, I would love to be Hotjar on their website.
Yeah, it would be good. Yeah. Yeah. So I think this calculator was really good in that we obviously, Ollie and I put our ages and all that kind of stuff. It takes into account your KiwiSaver balance, but it asks you to put the future KiwiSaver balance in. So what I had to do was then go find Sorted's KiwiSaver calculator.
Projection calculator.
Yeah, to then project out from our balances right now if we were contributing at like I think Ollie does 4% and I do 6% until we're 65, what's the balance going to be? And then that amount was
you take that number back to the original calculator.
Yeah. Okay. And then input that. But I guess that doesn't consider we don't own a home right now. And so the starting point, that's going to get drained again probably if we use that for a house. Yep. And so it's not entirely accurate. It also doesn't account for increases or decreases in income, maternity, paternity leave, all that kind of stuff. And so I think it's a good gauge if you want to see like weekly what you're aiming for or like a set number. But I don't think it's like, I think if you really want an in-depth forecasting, you really have to go to a financial advisor or like build out your own insanely complicated spreadsheet.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you put this all in, and then does it tell you how much you can live off per week based on what your assets are projected to be?
Yes.
Is that essentially what it's telling you? So it's kind of saying like, hey, you're going to have roughly this lump sum at retirement, and we're expecting that you guys are going to live for this longer period. So you could safely be spending X dollars per week.
Yeah. Yeah. So it does that like in this case, I only projected out our KiwiSaver balances. I would have had to do the same for our other investment portion of the total portfolio, but I just couldn't be bothered. So I just put it like in what it is now. And then on that basis, so combining current state of investments plus future KiwiSaver, it then gives you a weekly amount of what you can live on. And that date range in terms of time frame was from 65 to 90 years. That was just a preset time frame they use.
That's a decent range though.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah. Okay.
And the number that it spat out was...
Can you change that range?
Yeah. You can drag it up and down depending.
Okay. I guess that's simple maths. That'll just decrease your number that you can spend per week if you want to live longer.
Exactly. Okay. And you can then change still between like regions and main met and up and down, no frills choices, that kind of stuff. So the number that I got, which I just don't know if it's accurate at all, but is $2,166 per week is what we'll have if our KiwiSaver balances are. Okay. They were also in aggressive funds.
Is that including NZ Super within that 2,166?
Yes. Yeah. So that's NZ Super, KiwiSaver, and the other savings combined. So it says then we will have an extra of $500 per week over and above the lifestyle goal of 1,666.
Right. Okay.
Which I feel pretty happy with.
Yeah.
I think that's a good amount.
That's good. 2,100 a week is $112K a year.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Feels like that's decent amount.
Yeah, I feel like that would be. Is that pre-tax? I've got so many questions. There's a lot of nuance to this conversation.
That's a good question. I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I like it.
I mean, like when I see that, I'm like, okay, this gives me something to aim for. And then if I, like generally speaking, think, okay, maybe 110K a year for us both to live off.
Yeah.
That would probably get us some travel as well.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. It would be interesting, as you say, to rerun it on the assumption that you guys are, say, 5 years from now and you've taken money out of your KiwiSaver to buy your house. And let's say your KiwiSavers are back at like a nominal amount of like 10K each and see how much more
you need to.
Yeah, exactly. Potentially impacts it as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like many things in finance, this is not a set and forget type of scenario. No. You know, as one would say, as things change in your life, you really need to like redo these considerations, recalculate the numbers, think about it again.
It also, like thinking through the kind of finer details as well in terms of which KiwiSaver fund are you in, like what is your investments doing to then compound over that time to get to retirement, like those matter. It's just not necessarily reflected in a general calculator either.
Exactly. I also think this exercise really highlights that any of these calculators are really just made for like the most simple of scenarios.
Yeah.
And this naturally then gives a really big shout out to financial advisors where if you're an individual that has other more complicated things going on in your financial world, like you own a property, or let's say you have multiple investment properties or you're in a business or you're reliant on your shares in a startup company to basically help you fund your retirement. If you have scenarios like that, you're not going to be able to feed this into a simple calculator on the web and have an accurate understanding of where your position might be. Whereas there are far more, I guess, like holistic tools that advisors can use to run financial modeling scenarios that can assess the things like, okay, Christine's going to have a career gap from 35 to 40 because she's going to take time out of the workforce and raise kids. And so we'll cut her income from there. And then we will like figure out that Ollie's going to have a step change because he's going to do this new qualification. And so that's going to take his income up by 40K in 1 year, which is well above CPI. Like all those sorts of things an advisor can help you work through. And I think that's where people that use financial advisors for that type of planning have an edge, right? Because information is power. And the challenge with this is even knowing, I know you've done the best you can, but I also know that like your situation is more complex than what the calculator has enabled you to put in here, right? And so with that, you could be like, well, there's some other things here that'll probably make us be fine, but you also don't know that.
Yeah. And also it doesn't account for liquidity either. So some things I can get access to, others I can't. Like if you need money in the short term, then what happens?
Exactly. And all of this is about like assessing risk and your probability of actually getting to the result that you guys want. And that's why even though we could be well away from retirement, it's really helpful to have these discussions and considerations and thought processes soon because the longer you have, the more ability you have to course correct or make different decisions. If we were doing this exercise for the first time at age 55, we don't have as many choices and time available to make a different change or a different decision.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Is this again a doom and gloom topic? Potentially.
I don't think so. I feel like, we've covered what the potential baseline is that you need. So what the lower, minimum is. And then giving you some guidance, hopefully, listeners, on where you can, what to Google, basically, to find the calculators. And potentially, I think the rule that you mentioned before with the 4% and times it by 20 is a really good, apply that to any scenario.
Starting point. Yeah. Exactly. And starting with your income as the sorted calc or exercise, I think, made you go through was a really good starting point, right? Which is basically what kind of income do you really need? Where are you getting those income sources? Okay, you're going to need to fill the gap with a lump sum saved in some capacity, then figure out how you're going to save that lump sum. It really comes down to that.
And the best part of that is that it literally took me 10 minutes. So it's not like this needs to be.
Imagine how much more knowledge you'd have if you'd spent 30 minutes.
I know, right? Or engaged a financial advisor.
Or you could, true. They're going to spend longer than 10 minutes and it'll probably be money well spent. So yes. Well, hopefully there have been some good takeaways for people, some actions that can be taken if you've never considered retirement before. As always, we'll put some links in the show notes to some calculators that are good. But ultimately, big thanks to Kernel for enabling us to do what we do. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe wherever you're tuning in, whether that's video on YouTube or listening on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out at It's No Secret NZ on Instagram. Send us episode requests, feedback, and more. And on that note, we look forward to more positive episodes from next week.